Rooney of the Lexington Field Garden Club. This is Mary Bicknell, who's our archivist. And this is Steve Iverson. Today we're going to talk about the Lexington Field Garden Club and its history.
Hi, Ashley. I understand the Garden Club was founded in 1876. What was Lexington like at the time?
Well, let me go back a little past that, because
Okay.
if you think about Lexington was mainly a farming community. And then the railroad came in the 1840s. I've forgotten, the name was Lexington and West Cambridge Railroad. It changed to the Boston and Maine Railroad. And it began its service in 1846, and with that, Lexington began to change and began to grow. And people moved out here from Boston because they wanted the fresh air and get away from the crowded urban slums of Boston and so forth. And 1875 is about the 2,000, several hundred Lexingtonians who were preparing for the 100th anniversary of the Battle on the Green to welcome Ulysses S. Grant and all his cabinet members for the festivities. A letter to the relatively new Lexington Minuteman pointed out that Lexington looked a little disreputable, particularly in the middle of town because of the railroad, and somebody needed to do something about it. And with that, the Lexington Field and Garden Club was founded by a man. And a bunch of men who came from very good bloodlines joined them. And they were the type who had intellectual superiority, money. They were called Mr. by their wives. And they belonged to the mainline congregational Protestant churches. Probably a lot of congregationals at that point. Mm-hmm. And the club adopted a constitution that stated, now this I have to read, the object of this association shall be the care and protection of trees and shrubs in the streets and public places of Lexington, and the improvement of the town by the planting of additional trees and ornamental plants, the study and development of the natural resources of this vicinity, the cultivation of taste in arboriculture and horticulture, and the discussion of these and kindred subjects. That is still part of our mission today.
What's the difference between arboriculture and horticulture?
Arboriculture is trees, horticulture is plants.
Thank you.
I had to think back to my Latin for that one. Good question. In 1887, the club said it was willing to take care of the common, which was pretty disreputable because it was often hay-filled, and the cows would go there. And Mary told me, she's our archivist, they had cattle markets there. And they suggested to the town provide $150 a year, while the club would provide $50 a year, and probably the workers to clean it up. And with that, the common became the beautiful historical park it is today. Now we have two pictures which Mary found.
The first picture, where you see the posts at the end of the common, was taken probably sometime between 1885 and 1890. As Ashley mentioned, it had been used for cows and cattle fairs and haymaking, variety of uses, but along about mid-1880s, the two clergymen in town decided it should be sacred ground and not be used for these mundane activities, and hence the Garden Club took it over and started their deal with the town to move forward. If you look at the picture, you'll see that it was fenced because that was where the cows had been originally, and they didn't want them wandering in the streets. Right behind the monument, you see in the front of the picture, there's something that looks like a telephone booth. And we've been pondering what that might be. I think we've decided it is probably the protection for that rather spindly looking elm that grows up out of it, which apparently was the tree that President Grant planted in 1875. The following picture, which was taken 2 or 3 days ago, is a great picture of the common as it is now. You see the same monument, but all those elms unfortunately are gone, and what you see is sort of lush green maples. And although not used for cows or haying anymore, it still is a place where people will throw a frisbee and maybe have a picnic, and often filled with tourists. It's a great place, and the garden club is happy that it had something to do with that.
And you notice also it's much greener. You can't even see the church, which still exists in this bottom picture.
What happened to the tree that President Grant planted?
It died 27 years or 26 years after it was planted.
Oh, okay.
They didn't fertilize it enough.
I guess not.
Whatever.
You'd think that the green would have been a well-fertilized area since it was used for cows.
Yeah, it might have been.
Well,
They may have cleaned it up too much.
I'm not exactly sure when the Dutch elm disease really took
Yeah.
hold, but it
That could have been it.
part of it
Yeah.
as well.
Mm.
The club was incorporated in 1891. Matter of fact, we have people, members of our organization, who say our club is the oldest in the United States, but it wasn't incorporated until 1891.
And what does incorporation mean for a garden club? Formal set of rules?
Formal set of rules.
Okay.
But long before that, it was beginning to make its mark on the environment. From its very beginning, the group focused on improving the messy railroad yards that sat there right where we know is Depot Park now, in the middle of town. By 1886, the Boston Main Railroad was now running 22 trains a day each way through Lexington Center. That was really public transportation, if you think about it. We don't have anything like that these days. But that made for a lot of mess, old ties, wood, charcoal, and so forth. And people didn't really like what it looked like. But it was going to take a long time to move them out of there. Meanwhile, the club was discovering, as most of the United States was, there was a need for exploring the environment, getting away from some of the stresses of everyday life and going out and having picnics. This got to be very popular in the 1890s and was led by social reformers who also said you have to have parks. And so the club members took many field trips to explore their environs. In 1875, as you see that picture, 51 members went to a field meeting at Shaker Glen, which is off Woburn Street. I have not yet found Shaker Glen. I don't know if you have.
No,
Okay,
but I think I know approximately where it is.
approximately. And then do you want to explain the second
Yeah.
picture, Mrs. Wayne?
Well, the Shaker Glen picture was one for tromping around and nearby. The second picture of all those wonderfully dressed people on a porch is one of an 1892 laurel trek in New Hampshire. And the group went and they would gather laurel, or maybe just look at laurel, I'm not sure. And then it was a full day's outing. And then they would go back to the inn or the house where they gathered and have lemonade and cake and afternoon dancing. So, and these were very popular trips. There were a number of different ones. I think they would do it 2 or 3 times a year for a number of years. And
That was the afternoon dancing that got everybody.
yes, well, there was
That's
one.
recent.
There was one thing you mentioned, Ashley, about the ladies. The club provided the ice for the lemonade, and they're just very interesting little details in the Garden Club archives about all this. But
Matter of fact, there was one point where one lady provided saucers for the ice cream. I'm visualizing bringing these, of course there's no paper cups in those days, so they did that. Anyway, so they had fun too. They weren't all serious.
I understand they made trips to the Arboretum in Boston as well, in Franklin Park.
Yeah.
yes,
They
yeah.
got around.
And they got around.
And they, although we don't have a picture of it, they went out to Rutland, Massachusetts for, again, some kind of field trip. I remember them writing about that trip. There were rhododendron trips and laurel trips.
let me just back up for a minute. I'm curious about why you think the club was started primarily by men.
We know it was.
No,
Because Mary showed me lists and lists and lists of the male members,
yeah,
and it was all men, and they only paid $1 dues, and the women paid 50 cents because that's how it worked. And a matter of fact, as I remember, a woman was not president of the club until 1933, 58 years afterwards, when you think about it. So you think how much life has changed. Their men, and I'm sure in those days they worked hard. They were coming out here to run the garden club too,
yeah.
and do all that, and go out on these lovely trips and go afternoon dancing. Maybe life was very different. They didn't have TV.
Oh, I think life was different then.
Yes, I think it was too. But as the club went on, in the 1904, Frederick L. Emery, who was like sacred in this town, was a 36-year-old patent attorney, and he became president and was president for many years in there. He would take a break and then be president again. And one of his big pushes was to clean up that railroad. But first, the club acquired the land now known as Hastings Park, which is where across from Hayden.
Where they have the carnivals now.
Yeah, but they have the carnivals.
And
That was the
and
club's
the bandstand.
And the bandstand.
And the bandstand.
Right.
So that was the club's land, and they cleaned it up and designed it and made it all beautiful for the town, which I found fascinating. But of course, things were cheaper in those days, but money was not as much. And while Frederick L. Emery was president, he began to really lean on the railroad about moving its stuff out of the center of town. It was disreputable. And he began to push, and finally the railroad in 1921 agreed to sell that land, which we now know as Emery Park. It's right in front of the historic building and so forth, for $20,000, which I find amazing.
Did that end the train service to Lexington?
No, that didn't.
They
The train
moved
service.
elsewhere?
The train service didn't end. That ended after the big snow. I mean,
In
the trains were still going
mid-70s.
behind my house
Oh, okay,
when I moved here. I don't know where the station was.
okay.
It may have been over where the church is.
No, it was where the depot is,
It remained there.
as far as I know.
Okay,
But
but
So the land was sold to the town, but the station continued to be in service.
they cleaned it up. Now, we have 3 pictures of the depot which Mary found.
Yes, and the first one, you see the depot without its characteristic cupola that it has now. It was built in the, well, I'm not exactly sure when that building was built, but probably in the late 1840s. But it was about 75 feet longer than the depot building is now. And trains were kept at the what must be the east end overnight. But it was there. The picture looks a little barren. The park is fenced somewhat, but it's not planted. There's nothing particularly interesting about it. Apparently, a lot of the wood and stuff for the engines was piled along the tracks between the depot and Miriam Street. But in general, it was rather plain. There was a fire, I want to say it was 1915, 19 teens anyway, probably about the time of the First World War, that badly, it didn't destroy the building, but it damaged it badly. And they were going to pull it down and build a new one, and then decided just to rebuild the old one. And the next picture you see, where it does have a cupola, and there are some wonderful cars around the Emery Park, or it wasn't, yes it was Emery, that's 1936. And it looks improved. It is a park, there's grass, but if you look at the third picture, which was taken again several days ago, it's very green. There are flowers that are putting barrels along the streets in Lexington. The garden club has an active group that takes care of Emery Park. It was named, you said, Emery Park in 1936, 38.
After he died, it was
Yeah.
renamed from Depot Park to Emery Park.
He left money to the town for purposes in general for the garden club to use, but the focus was beautifying Lexington Center. And again, in that middle picture, you see elms, which unfortunately aren't there anymore. But the park is still beautiful and dedicated to Frederick Emery.
And today is home to all sorts of Frisbee games and
Oh,
kids
yes.
and people, etc.
And concerts occasionally?
Yes,
Yeah.
and picnics, they put in park benches around the edges that have been dedicated by families, and
You know.
many people will sit and have lunch or sit in the shade and read a book. It's a lovely place.
It's a very nice place.
What is the, how does the club go about its maintenance now of Emery Park and the green? Is it on a schedule? How many people?
Oh, I'm so
how many
glad
people
you
work
asked.
on it? What are the details?
Other details are, well, let me back up a little bit. The club still takes its mission to improve our civic beauty and civic gardens. And a lot of these islands and so forth all around town, the club takes care of. And as I went out of my house today, there are a whole bunch of people down at Revere Street working on that big island, cleaning and weeding and watering and so forth. Emery Park, there's a committee of a group of about 4 or 5 people. They would love to have more people working on Mondays, and they weed and clean it up. They do see there's going to be a need for new plantings coming up in a couple of years. There's the Hancock Clark Garden. That's always hard to say, but it's morning study group, which is a smaller group within the garden club. Weeds and waters that. There's the Monroe Tavern, which another garden club member takes care of and does that one. There's the library garden. There's the St. Bridget's Mary Garden, and have I forgotten any gardens? I think that's about, and the Minuteman, the garden plants. So all of these islands, and then all the different little islands around town, well, many of them are our responsibility. Unfortunately, sometimes when the members get older, it gets a little difficult. It also gets difficult, say, if you're taking care of the Minuteman, which is really fun to take care of. As a matter of fact, I'm on duty this week. When you suddenly see the tourists sitting on top of the flowers that you've been care of.
That's unpleasant.
You think, oh! You quickly take them off and say, can I take your picture standing in front of the Minuteman or something like that? Anyway, but it's a lot. It's a lot of work that the garden club does. It is absolutely amazing. Luckily, it's a big club.
So how many people are in the garden club now?
I think there are about 270, and about 10% of that group are men, which is great. We would like to encourage more men to join. It would make the garden club more fun. So we're in this is part of our vision for the future. We're having some programs sort of hoping to tantalize men to coming in. One's on stone walls, another one's on pruning. And maybe they would join with their wives or as a single, whatever, and join that club. The club is a great place to join if you're a newcomer in town or if you've just retired. When I just retired, the only people I knew were people from church or from when my kids went to school. And I didn't have any present day friends, so I was feeling kind of lonely. And all of a sudden I had ready-made friends, which is wonderful. And when I was sick,
69.
yeah, that's right. And they were right there. And there's a woman who joined the garden club, and she looked us up. She was in New Jersey. How do I make friends when I'm coming to Massachusetts? And it said, join the garden club, which I thought, oh, that's great. And people are finding this is a good way of getting involved and finding out more about the town and just getting outside of your neighborhood. So I think that's a wonderful part about it.
How do people find you if they'd like to find out more or if they'd like to join?
Oh, there is a website and Facebook, which the website is www.lexgardenclub.org, and the Facebook page is Lexington Field Garden Club.
And what sorts of things are you doing now to try to build membership? Or do you have plans to have any kind of outreach or something? You said you'd like to get more men to join, for instance.
Well, we can have a special
The
program.
special programs, right?
The ones on stone walls and
And
pruning, and we thought that would intrigue them. And we're trying to, as all clubs, we're trying to figure out how to increase our publicity so people know we exist. I mean, Lexington, people who live in Lexington are very busy. And how do you attract people to your particular organization? And not everybody wants to weed, but garden club isn't all about weeding. A lot of people just like flowers. A lot of people just like to come meet people. You know, you don't have to be a gardener. I mean, some of us are dirty fingers gardeners, and a lot of them aren't.
Do the members get to say, this is what I'd like to do, and this other thing not so much? Or do they get assigned to things?
Oh, yeah.
How does it work?
Yeah, there's a checklist. You say, oh, I'd like to do this. I'd like to bake. Oh, I'd like to go to lectures. Oh, I'd like to do a field trip, like to Shaker Glen.
So there's a lot of activities.
Yeah, there's a lot of activities, and there's a push. We have a lot of new young members who are now talking about, we'd like to organize a trip up to Maine, Ashley.
Yeah.
You know, this type of thing. But it takes leaders, and it takes leadership to do that. And so that's what we're looking for. Did we cover all the pictures?
We did cover all the pictures. But there was one thing, when you look at the picture of the common, if you go back to that, the Minuteman statue was added in 1910. And you look at it and it looks empty because what we're used to now isn't there, but that's when it came in.
And that's the statue the morning study group takes care of.
Yeah.
And all the kids sit on the geraniums.
All these pictures came from the Edwin Worthen collection, which is a digital collection at Lexington Library. Linda Carroll is in charge of it. There's also a collection at the Lexington Historical Society, but it is run to some degree in conjunction with the Worthen collection. But the Worthen collection is online. If one wants to go look at some of these pictures, just go to Carrier Memorial Library and look for it. It's there. And you can pull up all these pictures.
Is the depot considered part of Emery Park for your purposes? Do you tend to the grounds right around the depot, or just the park across the street from it?
Pretty much just the park across the street.
Oh, okay.
Which is an awful lot of work in its
It's a
own.
big space.
Yeah, it's a very big
And
space.
there's a lot of vegetation there, there's a lot of plantings and things.
And several years ago, they replanted some of the plants with native species. There was a concern to get out things that weren't appropriate to a New England park.
Sure.
So, but it's a nice place to work every Monday morning at 10 o'clock.
Were there, I'm trying to remember, were there one or two really big trees in that park that were taken down as part of a rehab?
Yes.
And what was the reason for taking them
They
down?
were that funny kind of maple.
Were they Norway maples?
Norway maples, I believe. Norway maples suck up all the water in the environment.
Oh,
They're very bad for the environment around it.
yeah.
And so they came out.
But they were non-native species, but unfortunately they were beautiful trees.
Yes, they are beautiful trees. And people say, oh, why don't you take them out? But they're terrible for the environment.
Did the garden club take them out?
No,
Or
the town
DPW?
did. The town did. The garden club works very closely with the DPW. Obviously, there's a lot of similarity there with the trees and all
I
that.
don't think so.
And matter of fact, when we had our annual plant sale this year, we held it at DPW, which was wonderful. They were absolutely wonderful to us, and it was a lovely cooperation between the two organizations. It's probably very good for them. So we hope to be doing some more planting for them. We're working on the community center a little bit, and things like that.
The new community center.
Yeah, the new community center. It's amazing what you can do. I ran into a woman because we're investigating a fall garden tour, and she happens to actually had the gorgeous plants, and this was late August. And I said, "What are you going to do with those beautiful palms. And she said, oh, I throw them away.
Hmm.
And I said, oh, we have this new community center. And I found a friend with a truck, and she came and got the palms, and they are now in the community center in some of those lovely rooms in the old part.
Yeah.
And there are these palms that we rescued. So the garden club often tries to rescue plants, and so when houses are going down, we try to tell people, look, if you, before the developers come in, we'll try to take the plants and do something with them.
And then houses do come down in Lexington fairly
Oh,
often
yes.
now.
Oh, unfortunately,
So
yes.
you've got a big job
Yeah.
rescuing plants.
Well, not everybody thinks to call us,
Mm.
you know, so that's a whole different ballgame. The house next to me where the developer came in, I did call and say, we'd love to have those plants, and the developer said, oh, no, she was keeping the plants. But between the time she called me that night, somebody stole them overnight.
Is that right?
And I was like, whoa, that's nervy.
That's really, that's disturbing.
Yeah.
Plant theft.
Yes, plant theft.
Happens on Beacon Hill all the time, apparently, with people have flower boxes and people come around and take the flowers out of their flower boxes and plant them somewhere else.
Oh, right.
Wow. Who knew?
Oh, no, we're getting to a nice gossiping time. Garden club.
The only thing I was gonna still ask was whether you have a location where you meet, a space.
Oh, let's not ask that. Big club has been meeting over at the Museum of National Heritage, which is no longer its name. They give it another name now.
The Masonic History
Yeah.
Museum.
Yeah, they did change the name.
And they just upped the rent considerably.
Oh,
So
okay.
at the moment things are kind of wobbly on that.
Well, thanks for talking, Mary, Ashley, this was fun. I learned a lot about the garden club that I knew nothing about, so I'm glad we did this.
Or maybe you'll join.
I'm thinking about it. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish up?
No, I think it was great to be here and on Lexington Remembers. And if you want to know any more about the garden club, we have a website, www.lexingtongardenclub.org, or there's a Facebook page, Lexington Field Garden Club. Please enjoy. Come to our first Wednesday in September.